So last week, the new M3 Ultra-equipped Mac Studio showed up here, and this thing is juiced. 32-core CPU, 80-core GPU, and for the first time ever on a device with Apple Silicon, 512 gigs of RAM. It's crazy fast RAM as well. Now, a few years ago, when I got the first Mac Studio in with the M1 Ultra, that product was already overkill for my workflow. I was shooting off of like Blackmagic 6K cameras. Since then, I now have a more technically demanding workflow. I now shoot off 4K cameras that are shooting simultaneously. I'm editing live with an Elgato Stream Deck, and I pump all of it into a Mac Studio. But this product here does that workflow better. Obviously, it's the new one, bigger numbers, but it doesn't improve my workflow in any significant manner, at least not for the kind of footage that I would throw at it. Even with gaming, like titles run faster on this device because the M3 Ultra has a very powerful GPU, but let's be real here, no one's buying a machine with half a terabyte of RAM to play games. So what can this super machine do? Apple's marketing says that the M3 Ultra does significantly better at 3D rendering and compiling code compared to the previous generation, and it does have improvements for my testing, maybe not as big as Apple's claims are, but the standout feature to me is actually the 512 gigs of RAM. That allows users to run really large AI models locally, like the ability to do it on device without having to send stuff to the cloud. So for a lot of people, I think privacy is an issue. Like, let's say you're a company or like an ML enthusiast and you want to train or just use a model that you have data that's sensitive. Let's say you're let's say you're a health clinic and you want to ingest your patient records and be able to analyze it and just spit out and give you like a summary of it. There's no way people are just sending that out to the cloud. So you would anonymize it, you would build or at least fine tune a model so that you could use it for your particular purposes. And the ability to do that on a device locally is an increasingly desirable technology. Now, there's a lot of models you can use to do this, but there's one in particular that's extra interesting. It's Deepseek R1. Now, that model, the 671 billion parameter model, is 404 gigs, and it has to all fit into VRAM. And I say VRAM because it has to be very high bandwidth for that memory. So GPUs, the memory for GPUs is called VRAM, video memory, and GPUs, because they process a lot of data in parallel, like all at once, a lot of pixels pumping through, being processed, they have access to extremely fast memory. And this system, because it uses Apple's unified memory architecture, has a lot of super fast memory. So I tested this device and compared its performance over several AI models and several hardware configurations, and smaller models run quite well on the system. You don't need all 512 gigs for any of the distilled smaller models, but the big one, that 671 billion parameter model, needs the highest configuration. Now, at first, it wouldn't even run. I was trying to load it into memory and it was crashing and just wasn't working the way that it should. And it turns out macOS locks how much VRAM it's willing to allocate out of the box. I had to go into terminal and open it up and give myself 448 gigs of VRAM, and it worked. Now keep in mind, this is not the full version of Deepseek R1. It is a 4-bit quantization of R1. It's close, but it's just not as accurate. Like, it's still got all the parameters, all 671 billion of them, but they're just not as detailed. It is a reduction in accuracy, but it is a big ass model and it performs very well, all things considered. Now, the thing that I thought was strange is that it was actually a better performing model at that 671 billion parameter size compared to the 70 billion parameter. And I think it's because of the architecture. That was the only thing that I could kind of figure out in my brain. But the fact is, it runs. The other thing is power consumption. So the power draw at wall when it was running that big model was well under 200 watts. And on a system, say you built that with like PC hardware and you got a bunch of GPUs running, you would need, 10, 12 GPUs to get that kind of RAM. Like, the amount of power draw, the difference in power is massive. It's probably like 10 times more electricity to run if you did it with that kind of PC hardware. There's obviously different ways to do it. But one thing to keep in mind, this system with the M3 Ultra chips does run at a higher wattage than both the M1 and M2 Ultra devices. Those used to be 370 watts, like for peak consumption. This is now 480, and it's just like the chip is just more powerful, draws more juice to be able to do it. Now, in terms of performance on that 4-bit quantized big-ass DeepSeek model, I think the speed is fine. Like, once you hit 17, 18 tokens per second, I think the speed is good enough for most applications. Even for developers, you want like quick code and copy and paste it, I think that's usable. I don't love the quality of output. I feel like because the 4-bit quantization is quite a big shrink in accuracy, it's not perfect. I think it just depends on what it is you're trying to get out of it, but it's the fact that it runs is like the most impressive thing to me. The other thing, pricing. I think when this product first launched, I saw a lot of conversation of like, oh, this is a really well-priced like local LLM. It technically is, because we just don't have a lot of options to choose from. Building something like this with like, consumer grade PC hardware would be quite expensive. But keep in mind that at the very minimum to get this kind of RAM, it's like $10K, right? And $10,000 buys you a ton of server time, or just like, if you want to get a subscription to something, it's a lot of money that this will get you far in terms of a subscription. But for people that need that private localized version, it delivers it. So I think what's interesting is that this allows a lot of workflows to exist when they couldn't before, just because of the nature of what this thing is. Okay, there you have it, the new M3 Ultra equipped Mac Studio.